Can a character ever truly be irredeemable? Can a character in any given piece of media commit heinous acts of violence and/or manipulation and still garner sympathy from the audience? Well, the answers to those questions would be yes and yes. I mean, just look at the massive fandoms that characters like Walter White and Rick Sanchez have. Those guys are deplorable. And there are still people who aspire to be just like them. So I guess the question we must then ask is, how and why? How do the writers behind these characters make them do terrible things and still somehow make them likable? Well, I think you can mainly attribute that to good character writing. They were able to make them relatable and charismatic despite the deplorable things that they did. And the fact that the writers can successfully do that is very interesting to me. It's almost a form of psychological manipulation. The specific topic of immoral but likable characters comes up in my mind every time I think about this one specific character from Yakuza 0. That character's name is Jun Oda. I always think about whether or not Yakuza 0's writers were successful in depicting Oda as a morally repugnant character that is still a very likable character despite their depravity. And this is because after playing Yakuza 0 all the way through, I was left with very confusing feelings about Oda. He was a very charismatic and likable sidekick to Kiryu, and up until a certain point in the game, I liked every moment his character appeared on screen. But that changed after a very disturbing revelation was made about his past. And by very disturbing, I really mean very disturbing. And yeah, I was left very perplexed after finding that out, and I didn't know how to grapple with those thoughts, which is why I thought, why not make a video about it to synthesize all of these thoughts? Why not make a video analyzing why Oda is a very complicated character? And that's exactly what I decided to do. So yeah, let's take a deep dive into this relatively minor character from the 6th game in the Yakuza series. As most of you watching this video know, in Yakuza 0 you play as two characters whose stories are split between different chapters in the game. One of those characters is Kiryu, and Oda is mainly present in Kiryu's chapters. Kiryu finds himself in a bit of a rut by the end of the first chapter of Yakuza 0, which is when he is approached by Tetsu Tachibana, the owner of a company called Tachibana Real Estate, who has the intention of hiring Kiryu as a real estate agent, and basically they really want to acquire a piece of land that could potentially hold a fuck ton of value, and they really need Kiryu's help, so that's why they ask him. And shortly after that meeting with Tachibana, he comes across Tachibana Real Estate's right-hand man.
綺麗事はよしましょうや、生瀬さん。もうこれ以上ごねてもあんたのもらいは増えませんから。見えすぎた芝居しやがって。金の問題じゃなかったら何の問題だ、こら！何か？あんたにはあの鳴き声が聞こえねえのか？子供の前で親の顔にさっさば叩きつけるのが橘不動産のやり方か。そちらさんも人様に説教垂れるほど真っ当な人間には見えませんがね。まあいいでしょう。
This is the scene in which we're introduced to Oda, and from the get-go, he's a bit of a smart-mouthed hard-ass, but his screen presence is still nonetheless very captivating. Oh, and also, if it wasn't obvious, Oda is Tachibana Real Estate's right-hand man. And Oda is a little bit skeptical about Kiryu's combat and mental prowess, so he tests him out in a fight, and from this point onwards, we really get accustomed to Oda. First, Oda basically teaches Kiryu how to be a real estate agent, and we get some funny moments.
よう来たか。待ちくたびれたぜ。小田。酸が抜けてるぞおい。上司呼び捨てにするやつがどこにいんだ。コーヒーを。いや注文は連れが来てからにする。また後で頼むよ。
かしこまりました。
お前先に注文する気だったんじゃねえだろうな。客を待ちながら優雅にコーヒーなんざすすってちゃ話になんねえぞ。それがビジネスマナーってもんだ。そういうもんか。別に期待しちゃいなかったけどよ。せめて同じことは二度言わせんな。うちの新人で桐生です。山野井さんよりご依頼の件 こいつがやらせていただきますんで。
へえ、そうですか。
おい、さっきの名刺、こういう時に出さねえでどうすんだ。
ああ、堂島組の桐生だ。
堂島組じゃねえだろ。だいたい名刺は両手で渡す。タメ口もやめろ。
Oda kind of comes off like a cool uncle, which is fitting because he is the guy that sets the stage for the real estate minigame in Yakuza 0 to be introduced, which on its face isn't very interesting, but with Oda as your teacher, it's a little bit more fun. After they take care of that real estate stuff, Oda pops in and out of Kiryu's story, but his presence is still very significant. There's a moment in the story where he gets the shit beaten out of him, and when we saw him walk into the room all bloodied up, I know we all felt like giving whoever did this to Oda a taste of their own medicine.
Oda.
At some point in the story, we find out that Tachibana needs dialysis because of his weak kidneys, and Oda is the one to relay this information to us.
昔、社長が腕をなくした時、輸血するまでにだいぶ手間取ってな。それで腎臓がうまいこと動かなくなった。社長の腕を落としたのは、その頃敵対してた中国人マフィアどもでね。もちろん落とし前は俺がつけといた。
仇の話には聞こえねえな。
昔のことだ。俺らはその頃まだ不動産屋でもないゴロつきでさ。でもそれ以来社長は一日おきに人工透析を受けなきゃなんなくなった。こいつをやらねえと社長は死んじまうんだ。
Judging by that cutscene, I think it would be very safe to say that Oda definitely feels a sort of kinship with Tachibana. In other words, he's more than just a right-hand man.
陈先生在叫你，要你把那日本人也带去。
G だおら。
何か問題か？
あんたの扱いについて顔役と話をつけなきゃならない。ただあまり歓迎ムードじゃねえようだ。
So apparently the people that own the place Tachibana is getting his dialysis in have somewhat of a problem with Kiryu being there, because Kiryu has a target on his back, because, you know, Kiryu was working with Tachibana Real Estate, a party that has many rivals in their pursuit of that piece of land. And after Oda takes Kiryu to the owner of the place, we get to see what is easily one of the worst depictions of a character who supposedly knows how to speak a certain language, absolutely failing to do so.
陈先生 J 我哭人是日本人你不在意用日本语吧
Oda is supposed to be ethnically Chinese, mind you, and his Mandarin sounds like absolute gibberish according to many Chinese Yakuza fans. Anyway, after Tachibana is done with his dialysis, both him and Oda accompany Kiryu on a trip to the Tojo clan headquarters, because the Tojo clan is another party that wants to acquire that piece of land, and they want to negotiate with them. And once they arrive there, we get a really cool scene with all three of them.
Oda, Tachibanaを頼む。
分かったよ。
Now, remember how Tachibana approached Kiryu because he wanted Kiryu to help them acquire that piece of land that could hold a lot of value? Well, after going to the Tojo clan headquarters, they find out that the current owner of that piece of land is in Sotenbori. And since Tachibana thinks it's a bit too dangerous to go to Sotenbori, only Kiryu and Oda decide to go.
俺も行きますよ。桐生の言う通りです、社長。状況の見えない蒼天堀だからこそ、俺たちが直接動くべきなんじゃありませんか。誰かが俺らより先に殻の一粒を手に入れれば、全部水の泡なんです。
We interrupt this program to remind you to subscribe, especially if you want to see more media critical analyses of video game series including Yakuza, Metal Gear, Alan Wake, and many more. I'm always expanding the amount of different video game franchises I cover. Additionally, you should make sure you check out Season 1 of Yakuza My Newfound Love, the series, if you want to watch all the Yakuza videos I've made up until this point. Or you could just check out the playlist for character analyses if that's all you're interested in. And lastly, remember to like the video too on top of subscribing if you're feeling extra generous. With that out of the way, let's get back to the video. So they eventually get to Sotenbori, and as they cruise through the town, Oda remarks about how he has a strange feeling being there for the first time in ages.
前に俺がいた頃の蒼天堀とはどこか違う。似て非なるものって感じか。
あんた蒼天堀にいたことが？
カムロ町に来る前は俺も橘社長もこの町にいた。ほんの1年半くらい前のことだ。その頃の俺らはマフィアと名乗っちゃいたけど、ほんの 4,5 人の所帯でね。ただ社長はその頃から近江のヤクザにさえ一目置かれてた。で、俺は社長の腰巾着だったわけ。
So we get a small piece of Oda's backstory, to which, speaking of that, what is his backstory? Well, at this point in the story, not that much has actually been revealed about his backstory, so if you're playing Yakuza 0 for the first time, you're clueless as to what Oda's past actually looked like. And I think that's a really good writing decision made by Yokoyama-san, because it gives us a chance to get accustomed and develop somewhat of affinity for Oda as a character. At this point in the story, we're thinking he's a really cool right-hand man to Tachibana and a friend/uncle-like figure to Kiryu. This changes as soon as his backstory is revealed, and that completely swindles us as the audience, leaving us with conflicted feelings. So when does this backstory actually get revealed? Well, that happens when they come across the owner of that piece of land.
急げよ、おい、早く来い。
今の声。
どうかしましたか？
何してんだ、早く乗れって。
行きましょう、牧村さん。
はい。
どうした？
いや、わからね
え。申し遅れました。桐生の同僚で小田っています。あれ、なんか嫌われちゃいましたかね。
Okay, that was a weirdly intense scene. Oda's voice very clearly triggered that woman, which is what everyone was probably thinking when they first played Yakuza 0. Oda definitely has a different vibe in this scene, for lack of a better word. He is not his usual easygoing, smart-mouthed self. In this scene, he feels more deceptive, and we're going to find out why soon. Okay, I kinda lied. We find out why after that action-packed car chase. Because after that action-packed car chase, they stop at a construction site to put the driver's dead body in the trunk, and then they decide to rest in the building.
渋沢はどっから俺らのこと気づいてたんだ。
落ち着けよだ。彼女が不安がる。
うぜえ、それがなんだ。
私は大丈夫です。
こっちは大丈夫じゃねえんだよ。
何やってんだお前。
That was a very seemingly out-of-character moment from Oda, which again is probably what you were thinking when you first played Yakuza 0. And this is probably the only moment in which I think the writing is a little bit sloppy, because I think they overdo it just a little bit by making Oda almost hit Makoto. I mean, that was a little bit much. I know they're trying to do some foreshadowing, but they definitely overdo it there. Every scene with Oda and Makoto before this one had enough foreshadowing, in my opinion. Regardless, Makoto voices her suspicions to Kiryu about Oda after Oda goes downstairs.
下の様子を見てくる。
悪かった。あんた、怪我してないか？痛むところは。
桐生さんでしたよね。 小田さんのことで聞いてもらいたいことがあります。
何？
私は多分あの人を知っています。
え？
やっぱ気づいてたんだ。
小田。
動くな桐生。動くなっつってんだ。
何してんだお前。
悪いけど俺はこの女を橘社長に会わせるわけにはいかねえんだ。
なんだと？
だからお前らには死んでもらうしかねえ。
And it's after that moment that Oda's backstory is revealed, and it completely changes your perspective on Oda. At an unknown date, Oda was born in the People's Republic of China. Presumably, he was born into a poor family and destitute material conditions, and this made him resort to a life of crime at some point in his early adult life. One day in 1983, he borrowed money from a Chinese mafia outfit and used it to immigrate to Japan. He eventually arrived in Sotenbori, Osaka, and despite the loan, he was still extremely poor. So he did pretty much anything to make money, such as armed robbery and selling women and girls to sex traffickers, aka human trafficking. One of the women he sold was Makoto Makimura, whom he found on the streets of Sotenbori and then sold to a Korean syndicate that then put her in a cage and then sexually abused her. Sometime after doing that very heinous act, Oda eventually formed a small gang, where members would indicate that they're a part of the gang by donning bat tattoos on their arms. And then he eventually met Tachibana, whom he was extremely impressed by after he beat the shit out of him.
あの人をみこしに担ぐことが俺の役割だと知っただけだ。なのに橘さんが片腕をなくしたのは俺をかばってのことだった。敵対グループに不意打ちされてね。その時俺は橘さんだけはこの先も絶対に裏切らねえと誓った。だがよ、そう思った矢先だ。俺は橘さんと一緒にあのことを知っちまったんだ。テレビで中国残留孤児の特集番組がやってて、そこに何年か前の古いニュース映像が流れた。日本に肉親が見つかったって残留孤児が来日してる場面だった。その子の姿見てすぐに思い出した。俺が最近韓国系の組織に売り飛ばした女だってな。年頃も合う。それだけなら笑って済ませるとこだ。でもよ、母さん、シャオちゃん、信じられなかったよ。俺が何の気なしに地獄に突き落とした女は俺が心底尽くそうと思った兄貴の生き別れの妹だったんだ。
Okay. Wow. That was probably the darkest backstory for a Yakuza character. Like, seriously, I don't think there's a Yakuza character with a darker backstory than that. I mean, this motherfucker literally sexually trafficked his best friend's sister. And yeah, I know that he didn't know she was his sister at the time, but that doesn't fucking matter. Because especially after finding out that she was his sister, he made the extremely selfish decision to attempt to kill Tachibana's sister rather than let him reunite with her. Keep in mind, Tachibana and his sister haven't seen each other in years.
取り返しがつかなかった。いくら過去のことでも橘さんは俺のしたことを許しはしねえだろう。なら俺 俺がやれることは2つに1つ。破滅を覚悟で社長にあんたを会わせるか、もう1つ、あんたの存在をなかったことにするか。俺はこの怪我だ。どうせ死ぬなら立花さんの役に立って死にて。オダ、虫のいい話だけどさ、あの人に俺がそう言ってたって伝えてくれねえか。俺は本当に立花さんが好きだったって。
Jesus fucking Christ, man. I don't think there's a more twisted bombshell that's ever been dropped in a Yakuza game. On top of that, he's seemingly one of the only openly gay Yakuza characters, which makes it all the more worse. Because now, one of the only openly gay Yakuza characters was also a piece of shit sex trafficker. I mean, damn, if you're gonna include a gay character in your video game series, don't make the first one a goddamn piece of shit. Anyway, hopefully RGG can correct that mistake in the future with a gay character who isn't an absolute piece of shit. So, what do we take away from Oda's character? I'd say the answer to that question is complicated. We're introduced to him as a wise-ass cool uncle who also has this fervent loyalty to his boss that's very respectable. But then it's revealed that he was a goddamn human trafficker in the past, who then, after finding out that he literally trafficked his boss/lover's sister, not only didn't tell him the truth about that, but attempted to murder her out of the selfish desire to remain in a relationship with him. But then, at the same time, the reason as to why he engaged in human trafficking in the first place was because of the very destitute position he was in at the time as a Chinese immigrant in 1980s Japan. Those sorts of material conditions can drive anyone to do anything just to make ends meet, because without at least a little bit of an income, they're either left starving and homeless or a victim to human trafficking themselves. And while that doesn't excuse what Oda did, it definitely puts it into perspective, and he ultimately gets an apt ending to his story. He doesn't get a get-out-of-jail-free card, but he ultimately dies content with the life that he lived with Tachibana. Because what he did was irredeemable, for sure, but it was the destitute material conditions that he found himself in that necessitated that in the first place. So it ultimately put him in a gray area, so it only made sense to make his death kind of gray too, in a sense. But yeah, that's all I have to say about Oda's character. If you have any thoughts that you'd like to share about this Yakuza character, write them down in the comments. I'd love to see other perspectives on this very interesting Yakuza character, whether they agree or disagree with mine. And remember to subscribe if you want to keep up to date with the videos uploaded to this channel, and press that like button too if you enjoyed the video. Anyway, thanks for watching.